No Jumper, coolest podcast in the world. And today I'm having to sit down with a guy that I met. And let me just explain how I found out about you and what your story is that my neighbor hit me up and sent me a TikTok that you had made about your experience with DatPiff. And he just said, this is a podcast I would watch.
Yeah.
Watch the TikTok. I was like, okay. If only for my neighbor, I got to do this podcast because I'm very interested as well. So today, KP coming through.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. So, okay, let's do like the abbreviated version of how you even got to the point of starting DatPiff and being involved with all that in the first place. What was your experience before that?
I think growing up, I was always super interested in like the bootleg culture. And I know that's kind of like a bad negative word, right?
But for so many of us, that was critical, whether it was
Yeah.
like buying mixtapes from the
Yeah.
corner store
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
downloading stuff off Napster and
Yep.
stuff. That was, now everything's so streamlined, but that was a huge part of a lot of our childhood.
Yeah. I mean, I would always take trips to, in Philadelphia, we had the Italian market. I don't know
Mhm.
if you've ever been there, but it's a cool little market they have on weekends. And a lot of vendors, like the fruit vendors and stuff like that. But they would also have the bootleg VHSs and things like that.
Mm.
Same thing with every time I go to New York, I was fascinated with Canal Street.
Mhm.
Canal Street, not just the clothes, the jewelry, but that's where I got really introduced to the mixtapes.
Mhm.
And they were all physical, obviously in physical form back then. You're talking 2005, 2004 or so. Mainly it was like mixes like the DJ Who Kid, G Unit radios,
Mhm.
and even somebody like DJ Whiteout was making mixtapes back then. But they were all on these little Asian, corner store little stands.
Yep.
And you would just see the wall of them. And for me, it was just the idea of getting access to this music that you couldn't really find. I mean, you could use maybe not Napster, what was it at the time, LimeWire,
Mhm.
something like that. You could download music, but I'm talking about having an actual CD that you could buy outside of the stores that was an actual legit mix, DJ mix, new songs that were just popping up in New York that hadn't even hit the radio yet.
And it might be kind of confusing to some of the fans out there who are younger or just weren't interested at that time. But I think that the thing that like basically created the mixtape era was the fact that the music industry basically had not figured out how they were going to really be able to profitably put out records. And so they were really, really kind of not getting behind artists unless they were willing to really do the club records and the pop records that could actually have radio spins and everything like that. And meanwhile, you have all these blogs and stuff starting to pop up. Actually, the mixtape era was really like before the blog era, although they kind of overlapped.
The physical mixtape era.
Yeah, and so you had a lot of frustrated rappers. Like, for instance, I'm just reading Prodigy's book for the first time, or rather listening to it on YouTube, which everybody should do. But there was just this whole era where rappers really kind of had to put out music for free in order to be able to work up enough of a buzz that the labels would be willing to get behind them on a major label.
Yeah, I mean, mixtapes were really, the essential starting place for artists. Some would call it a demo tape, or maybe it was only a few songs or something like that. But again, one of my core memories as a kid was going to New York and always being handed these CDs. Yeah, a lot of times they try to just get money and hustle you out of it, but that was kind of the way artists would introduce themselves to people, either giving it away. And then for me, like I said, touching on what you said, labels weren't really knowing how to release, especially compilations. Like, yes, albums they were doing just fine. You could put those out in stores. I think, before it was FYE, it was called The Wall. I don't know if you're old enough to remember The Wall or if you had that out here. But as far as compilations, 25 artists that are all on different labels being on one CD was like, we can't do that. We can't be involved in that.
And also the style of the time was that you had somebody like Lil Wayne who just wants to rap on everybody's beats.
Yeah.
And so you're not able to put those out through major labels. It would have been way too much of a headache. So in order to put that kind of content out, mixtapes just seemed like the obvious place.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And okay, so a lot of great entrepreneurship in hip hop really kind of stemmed from that mixtape era, since World Star was first born to sell mixtapes, physical copies, and then he kind of realized that that wasn't necessarily the best business, and he starts uploading videos and creates World Star as we know it. What was your moment of realization that made you think like, oh, there's a business to be built here that could kind of go past what mixtapes have done?
Yeah, for me, it was never thought of as a business, right? I enjoyed so much the idea of sharing things, you know, with my friends that they hadn't heard yet. Like that's how I kind of got off, for lack of better words, as a kid, was basically being like, I want to put you on to stuff.
Mm.
I was a kid that showed up at sleepovers with new music, or, you know, once I started driving, had, you know, wanted people to sit in my car and listen to this new song. And that's what really fueled and energized me, was knowing that, hey, I got music that you probably never heard. Have a seat, let's listen to this.
Mm.
From there, it became the idea of, how can this be shared with a broader audience? Or if I have a friend in Virginia and I'm up here in Philadelphia, how can I share this with them? And you know, from downloading music online, using things like Real Player and stuff like that to host it, it was kind of like, you know, I wonder if I can take these from the stack of physical mixtapes I have and essentially be able to upload it to a streamable player online, just like the Real Player.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really just playing around at the beginning of the internet era of, like, you know, this is when people were starting to burn CDs and things like that. You know, how can I put this in, rip this, track it out, track by track? And the artwork at first was a challenge, because I'm like, okay, I need to be able to get the artwork in this player as well. At the time, we had scanners,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so I would have to scan the artwork, track out the songs individually, you know, to MP3s, name the files. And then from there, it was just creating a custom player to be able to upload it. And it started off with really just a few, because the idea really wasn't, oh, I want this to be a business. I want this to be world, you know, accessible to everybody, and, you know, ultimately have it become what it became. It was more so just a place to be able to share it, give you know, friends a URL, and they can access it. And
And what year was this?
2005.
Okay, so from my perspective, the blog era revolution in hip hop basically started around 2005.
Yeah.
Now, right, Two Dope Boys. I think that they were all maybe 2004 when they cracked off, but 2005 definitely stands out to me as the era where I was looking at all that stuff. And if you remember, there was like an era in which, because there'd always just be a link to download whatever song or mixtape they were showing you on these blogs, and you would kind of see how there would be a certain platform that they would be uploading these files to, and then that platform would start to get zapped by the major labels, and all of a sudden those links would be broken by the time you went to hit it. Sometimes it would have a list of like 3 or 4 different links, like on a pirate site. Like if you ever had to watch like a pay-per-view event or whatever, sometimes they'll have 3-4 links that you can choose from, and one of them will work. And but then there would be like new ones popping up, and it would seem to me, never got confirmation, that these sites were probably incentivizing the blogs to use their upload link because they were selling ads off of it, etc. But from your perspective, it seems like you kind of had loftier ideas than a lot of the blogs in terms of creating an actual platform where you'd be able to upload consistently. Were you viewing yourself and this platform as potentially different from all the blogs of that era?
Yeah, because like you said, prior to that, it was really just providing a link to a file sharing site and hoping that either the link didn't expire, it didn't get a DMCA takedown, or that it was even accessible in the first place. You know, that's why the idea of creating these embeddable kind of standalone players, where you could stream the music, was more appealing, because it's like you don't necessarily have to download. You know, obviously that came later down the road, was adding the ability to download.
But that was kind of limiting, because it was like, for somebody like me who had their computer set up in their room and I've downloaded hundreds of mixtapes, great, the download works fine. But if you're somebody who's using the computer in the school library and you want to listen to a new mixtape, it's kind of difficult.
Yeah, but funny enough, one of our, you know, I want to say 20 to 30% of our registered emails were all EDU emails. You know, so it's funny because I think a lot of these kids at the time were actually streaming these on their computer in their colleges. You know, but yeah, that was really kind of trying to find something different from just having to download files, take up space on your computer, make it more easily accessible and right away. Like, sure, there might be a little buffer. The internet was slower at that time. But it wasn't going to take as long as a 3-hour download or whatever, you know, 56 megabyte, you know, file, or, you know, something like that would take at that time. You know, and it also absolved us. We found a way that, and again, we were never doing this, you know, it was never the idea to let's become super profitable and, you know, kind of become what we, you know, ultimately became.
Which might be hard for people to understand, because now you create something online from day one, you're kind of thinking about how could this be monetized in the long run. But at that time, you know, it was many years before most of those hip hop blogs even really began to monetize in any meaningful way. You know, the culture was very much still just like what I think most people were focused on.
Right, right, yeah. You know, so once it started, you know, because after we posted a few mixtapes, obviously friends and family start coming to visit or referrals from them, you know, people saying, hey, you can go visit this. We start seeing, you know, 10, 100 people a day, 1,000 people a day. Once it started reaching a couple thousand people a day, we started realizing, you know, maybe we could monetize this, but how? Is it legal?
Mm.
You know, this is when all of the, you know, the mixtape, physical mixtape buying sites were all getting shut down. They were trying to find loopholes by selling, you know, you buy a, you know, sticker, you get a mixtape, trying to find loopholes around it. But the internet and, like you said, the blog era was still very new at this point, so nobody really knew what the rules were. It was kind of the wild, wild west. Um, in speaking to, you know, attorneys and different people that kind of knew the ropes a little bit more and kind of this safe area versus the full-on gray area versus the completely out of bounds area, we found a way that as long as we kind of made it clear that these were for promotional use only, you know, we're
Mm.
just using these to promote, you know, these artists, these songs. We're not profiting from the actual streaming and downloading of these mixtapes. Um, you know, obviously we're profiting from the ad traffic to the page, but not directly selling, you know, these songs or, you know, so that was how we were able to do something new, monetize, but not be completely out of bounds where the labels were like, no, we're shutting this down.
Right. So yeah, what were the first mixtapes that you uploaded? Was it just a bunch of random classic mixtapes from that time period, or was there anyone that you had actual involvement in?
In the beginning, there was no real involvement. It was all just the ones that were being bought in Canal Street. Like I said, the ones that stand out to me most, and the first few uploaded were the G Unit Radio, different volumes.
Hmm.
Like I said, this was back in the time 2005, 2006, when G Unit was probably the biggest, you know, hip hop group on the planet.
And then Dipset right behind him.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
actually watched a Cameron interview yesterday where he was saying that they were the first ones to do a mixtape, making it very clear that in his mind they were before G Unit. Even though I think most of us probably remember G Unit kind of being
Yeah.
at the forefront.
I mean, you know, I remember both, and I will say Cam might be right because I remember even before DatPiff, I remember, you know, buying Joel Santana's "Back Like Cook Crack"
Mm.
mixtape, and that was a mixtape. That wasn't an album. I'm not even sure if it's on streaming services now, but you know, I think he might be right. You know, they
Mm.
might have been doing it
I
now.
think 50 was just way bigger, so people
Exactly.
probably perceived him as being the first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. 50 came out and had that global appeal. You know, once In the Club came out, it was almost like, okay, he's a superstar.
Mm.
You know, Dipset was always kind of an underground. You know, they had obviously notoriety in New York. They were known some of their songs, but never to the height that G Unit was.
Right. And so, okay, like, were you spending a bunch of money on the hosting early on? Was
Not really.
so it was profitable from early on, and
Yeah, I wouldn't say crazy profitable, but more than enough to pay the bills on it.
okay.
Because there wasn't, you know, it wasn't like it was taking up a whole bunch of storage and bandwidth at that time. It was kind of, it was small.
Mhm.
Um, you know, so yeah, I mean, I would say definitely early on it wasn't losing money because it wasn't costing much to operate. Then once we started implementing, you know, ads and things like that, started making money, and but then obviously as the traffic grew, it just continued to scale.
Right, definitely. And when I think about starting, you know, a tech startup, which is basically what this was, it's usually like, in my mind, it's very, very resource intensive. You're gonna have to have programmers working on it and stuff. Like, what was your skill set, and how difficult was that to really get to the point where you had a online player that was able to play all these different mixtapes?
Well, you know, thankfully for me, I should say thankfully, I mean, I don't really have any technical skills myself.
Mm.
You know, in the beginning, I teamed up with a guy who was super involved in programming. One of his hustles was he used to buy and flip porn sites. You know, that was his thing. I'm going to buy a porn site that's outdated, and I'm gonna give it a full makeover, and I'm gonna sell it almost like a house. Like you buy a
Mm.
house that needs some remodeling, needs some touch ups. You know, do a little bit of renovation, and then you put it back on the market. That's kind
Mm.
of what he did with porn sites. So he had that experience. Um, so it was more so about giving the idea of what, you know, it should be, how it should work, what features we needed. Obviously, you need things like the back end to be able to upload tracks. You know, uh, eventually the ability to allow other users besides, you know, myself to be able to upload on it. be able to create accounts and do all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I had no real technical experience myself. Um, so outside of really the idea, the vision, and it was more so about giving kind of the blueprint of what you know I, I think would be successful, to him, and then kind of becoming partners in the beginning on it.
Okay. And so as this grows, I'm assuming you've just got problem after problem as it keeps growing. Like what's the timeline like from your perspective in terms of this being took to the next level versus also having to deal with all these stumbling blocks that I assume were kind of getting in the way of the progress?
Yeah. I mean, it took maybe 3-4 years before we really ran to any major issues. Outside of that, it was always technical stuff, things breaking, the player not working,
Okay.
MP3s not being able to be uploaded or not being able to be read. It was more on the technical side, not really the, I guess, public facing side. There were no issues. Um,
And how were you promoting?
weren't
You weren't at all. It was just
no.
people just had to
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah. And that's the craziest thing is I can honestly say we've never spent $1 advertising.
Mm.
In the history of DatPiff, never $1 on advertising. It was at the time when Yahoo was the main search engine. Google, I think, came about maybe a few years after that. But I think people, one of the main things that they were searching was free mixtapes, right? So organically, we would just see so much traffic come from Yahoo and then, eventually Google, just people, like me before, DatPiff began searching, how can I get free mixtapes? People really interested in the culture, just going on the search engines and finding out where they can find these.
And were you doing SEO work in order to get it out there, or was it just kind of happening?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. And I think, the platform, it was essentially called DatPiff, the authority in free mixtapes. Like that was
Mm.
kind of our tagline, the authority in free mixtapes. So I think having that as like, the name of the site and stuff as well, outside of just the domain name. I think that organically, once we started getting a couple hundred, then a couple thousand, I think it was almost like, okay, these guys are the leaders now in the word free mixtapes. So there was SEO done, but again, never paying anybody outside, never paying the Yahoo or the search engines directly.
Mm.
More so just making sure it was all proper, and then hoping that the organic traffic that was looking for those keywords just would flow in.
And so, how long did it take before you started having angry rappers getting in touch with you, or angry labels? I'm
Yeah.
sure that at some point they start to realize, oh, this guy has a real business going, and
Yeah.
we're not really being cut in on it. What was that like?
I believe the first time I really felt that wrath was about 2008 to 2009. Um, it was during the Gucci and Waka Flocka era when they were putting out tons. I think Gucci put out, I don't know, 30 mixtapes in 1 year or something
I
crazy.
can say that was very much the middle of my period of time. There's probably like 5 years where me and my friends like only listened to Gucci and
Mhm.
artists who are directly related to him.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was, they were flooding us. We weren't working directly with them at the time, but obviously them putting out so many mixtapes online, us being the main kind of source for free mixtapes, we were getting almost all the traffic for them.
Mm.
And we had Leor Cohen, who was running Warner at the time. He basically reached out. Well, he essentially told his team, "Look, I can't stand that one of our main artists. When I search his name on Google, free mixtapes are the first thing that comes up."
Mm.
He's like, "That's just not acceptable." Um, so their lawyers ended up sending us, a takedown for almost every, Gucci mixtape, whether it was official, not official, whether it was a one song on a compilation. They wanted that whole thing down. Um, so that was the first time, we were kind of like, huh, we kind of have to do something here. We
Mm.
can't ignore Leor Cohen. He's a big figure in this industry, has been for years. He's a powerful guy, and also somebody we don't want to piss off. Um, so we had that, and we were able to work it out. Reached out to them and explained, like, look, our goal is not to profit. Obviously we are through ad traffic, as he's smart enough to know. But our goal isn't here to pirate your artist music. Our
Mhm.
our goal is to give them a platform to grow their fan base. And then we started giving them some data and just some facts, about, like, this. Look at his growth, across the globe since he's put out all these projects. And how much have you guys invested in him? How many actual albums has he put out through your label? So what do you, like, what do you contribute that growth fully to? And then I think he started to realize, okay, it's not a bad thing. it's making our artists bigger. It's giving them a platform that we don't necessarily want to be involved in, because we don't want Gucci sending us 25 albums that we have to clear and put budgets behind and do all that.
Hmm.
So I think it was the first time. It was a blessing and a curse. Obviously it was frustrating. We had to piss off Leor Cohen and have to be introduced that way. But it also kind of set the standard for labels across the board that, you know what, mixtapes are here, they're powerful. There's a huge audience around them. We can't necessarily do anything about it, because obviously recording contracts and things like that at the time didn't have any language around them not being able to put out free music.
Hmm.
So it essentially, in a way, forced them to kind of learn how to live with us and use us.
Okay. And so what's that relationship begin to look like? Does he just kind of relent and say, okay, you guys can keep this stuff up on your service, or are there caveats?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was essentially, basically the talk that we had. We met with them in New York, and essentially the conversation went along the lines of, we'll let you guys live, we'll let these projects live, but when we need your help, you have to help us. If we have an artist that we just signed that has a very small following, we want the same look a Gucci Mane would
Mm.
look that he would get. So it was more a trade off of, we'll let you guys live, but you need to be there when we need you, or if we ask for a favor for something, you got to look out for us.
That sounds like a relationship that could get problematic relatively quickly.
Yeah, yeah. It didn't, until I think almost every other major label somewhat followed suit.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
they all want that deal, it's going to be tough because you only have so much real estate on the homepage and whatnot,
Yeah.
right?
But at the same time, we had to make the decision to say, okay, if we want to sustain what we're doing, we kind of have to get in bed with them in that
Mm.
way, because they could shut it all down, have their lawyers contact us, they could go to the domain host, shut it down. There's a lot of things that somebody in their power or their position could do, because ultimately we didn't own the music.
Mhm.
So yeah.
So by 2009, how many employees does DatPiff have, and how much money would you estimate that you were bringing in per month?
2 employees.
That's it. Wow.
That's it. And I would estimate monthly in 2009, maybe about 30 to 40,000 a month or so.
Okay. And your expenses are relatively minimal?
15.
Okay.
So maybe less. No, probably less than that.
And,
Yeah.
and so what is your thought process in terms of like where this business is going to go and how you're going to monetize long term? What was your thought process on it? Because there's a lot of different ways you could go. You could just try to be a pure platform and have as many people uploading as possible, and then maybe you sell additional services to smaller artists who want promotion. Then the other way to think about it is that you could try to really be like a curator and only upload the best stuff. Because I do have these memories of going to DatPiff and looking up Wiz Khalifa mixtapes and just finding like all these bootleg ones as well, and having
Yeah.
a hard time finding the correct thing that I was actually trying to download. And
Yeah.
I assume that you guys kind of tried out a bunch of stuff or had a lot of different concurrent thoughts about how you were going to make this thing make sense as a business, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think at first it was, let's find a way to make it kind of, YouTube was also newish at that point. They've been in around 3-4 years, but the same kind of UGC, user generated content platform, where we open up the floodgates for everybody to upload. But obviously once you do that, then it becomes, okay, now how would somebody stand out? Or, how can we showcase what we're trying to show people, instead of them seeing, 120 new mixtapes uploaded in order, and then more likely than not, they're all going to get lost in the shuffle. So it became, how can we curate this, to make it so, the more popular mixes, or ones that are just getting traction, are the ones focused and showcased at the top. Then it became creating algorithms based off of listens in the past hour, number of comments overall, number of ratings, and then just creating an algorithm that would automatically populate those in a certain section. We had the now trending. Once we got that going, we felt good about the curation, that okay, what's supposed to be highlighted is being highlighted the right way. People can find what's popular versus having to dig and hope that they find it. And then from there it became, okay, how can we create the ability for people who may not be trending or maybe brand new to also get some spotlight. And that's when we created the featured tab, which had 3, those were paid slots. So that's when we began kind of the more direct sales aspect versus just the ad monetization.
Mhm.
And it wasn't our goal wasn't let's squeeze as much as we can out of these people. It was let's give everyone a fair shot. If they're not a Gucci or a Waka or somebody who's big at that time, or a Lil Wayne, how can they still get some love and get some light? So we would just sort of figuring out different ways to curate it, give everybody a fair shot, and also just make it make sense as a business overall.
Definitely. So, what's the next major hiccup you face in all this? Because I assume at some point the labels really started to make more of a issue out of all this, or was it the artists? Or because at a certain point you guys end up giving artists like big advances, or
Hmm.
not advances, but just giving them money straight up for exclusive releases, right?
Yeah. That was one of my visions with it as well, was again coming from an era where I loved exclusivity, like going to my friends and showing them this what was exclusive to me and to them at the time. It was, how can we be the innovators in the space, not just with a catalog, but also with something that's giving them something that's new, that originated right here, versus something that may have existed in the streets of New York or on a physical CD. And funny enough, Soldier Boy is somebody who always prides himself on, I was the first to do it. I was the first to do it. Soldier Boy was the first major artist to reach out to us and talk about exclusive content. And, he was huge at that time. He had Kissed Me Through the Phone and all that stuff out around the same time.
But then he also has all this underground stuff that he's just doing in his room.
Hmm.
And it's like Soldier Boy had this mainstream career, and then he also has all these videos that he's doing, and he's just sort of obviously just getting fucked up and sitting in his living room and just
Yeah.
making music. And he had like a whole separate fan base that was like these very terminally online blog
Yeah,
kids.
yeah. I mean, he was a pioneer in many ways. Like I give him the utmost respect. I think as far as where the industry is now with live streaming and with podcast, I think guys like Soldier Boy and even Joe Budden, they deserve a lot of credit for really paving that way.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Budden with Joe Budden TV back then, Soldier Boy with what he was doing with his live streams, and having the idea of doing releases online only versus relying on his label to do everything for him. I think it was really innovative and forward thinking. So, Soldier Boy came and started giving us exclusive content. He even did a mixtape, called DatPiff at one time. And he was just flooding us for a while with projects. And, you've been in this industry long enough to know that it's kind of like a monkey see, monkey do type industry. When somebody sees, oh, this is what they're doing, this is what working for them, the floodgates really just opened, to the point where almost daily I'd have an artist where they were big, most of them I knew their name at least, but they would just start reaching out saying, hey, can I do a release with you guys? Hey, can I send you this content? Hey, can we do this? So again, it was one of those things. Going back to it being a blessing and a curse, it's a blessing because it's, hey, all these guys are lining up to give us these projects, give us this content. But ultimately, to your other point, it also then became kind of a who's who, where these bigger guys, these guys who were multi-platinum artists or so, would reach out and say, hey, I want to give this to you, but what are you going to give me? And if I just told them, oh, we're going to give you a platform to host it on, they said, I could drop it on YouTube, or I don't really need you guys. That's when it became, okay, we're doing well enough where we can make this worth our while for both of us. We can make it profitable. If we can estimate we're going to get a couple 100,000 people on launch of this mixtape, okay, it might make sense to give them a few $1,000s or so.
Do you remember the first artist that you paid? Was it Soldier Boy?
No, we never paid Soldier Boy $1, believe
Okay.
it or not. I want to say it may have been French Montana. And it was kind of like a package deal. He had 2 projects coming out. He had a Coke Boys mixtape he wanted to put out. And I think he came to us looking for like $5,000 or so. It wasn't crazy. So that was one of the first ones. And again, the industry as it works, people start talking then. French is a very vocal guy, likes to,
Let everybody know that he's on his business.
yeah. So, he starts telling people like Diddy and, so then, I start getting reached out from Diddy's team about a Cassie mixtape or other ones. And then obviously the word spreads from there. Hey, I heard you pay people for, mixtapes. But again, it was always something, it was always something that would make sense. because obviously we could never own the music, we could never distribute the music, we could never make physical copies and sell them. We could only get the promotional rights to them. So these
Mhm.
deals, the funny thing is, there's no deals like this that there or contracts, I should say, that existed like this. So I essentially was putting together these promotional exclusives, where we're paying you for exclusive promotion. You're gonna release it with us first. We're gonna get all your tweets,
Right.
because Twitter was, the big platform at the time. And it's more of just a promotional agreement that you're just gonna do this exclusively through us.
Mhm. Definitely. Yeah, and it seems like that. Like, do you have any regrets about that? Because it feels like that probably kind of opened Pandora's box for people to try to get paid left and right. And if you compare it to another website at the time, like WorldStar, WorldStar wasn't paying for exclusives.
Yeah.
WorldStar was saying, "Hey, you're going to pay us, and then we're going to host your video and promote it," which seems like it worked out great for them. And the other day, I went scrolling through WorldStar just to see what it looks like these days, and they still have people paying them for
Mhm.
premieres on there and whatnot. Although it used to be kind of like wall to wall with ads at the top, on the
Yeah.
sidebars, et
Yeah.
cetera. It
Yeah.
feels like it doesn't. I didn't see any of that.
Maybe you have a good ad blocker, because I'll get into that later when we talk about the transition to the new company and the company that actually bought DatPiff and now owns DatPiff, WorldStar, Genius, and
Oh,
DatPiff,
what's it called again?
MediaLab.
MediaLab. So they buy tons of sort of aging media properties and make
Y-
businesses out of them.
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
don't know if you want to jump into that now.
I just want to try to stay in order,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah. So like you're paying all these dudes, and is that like a full era? Would you say like you're doing that for like many years before it kind of stops making sense, or like when would you say that era got disrupted?
It got disrupted with competition.
Okay.
And funny enough, I'm always someone who loved competition because it kept me just on my toes. One of our first competitors was Live Mixtapes. I'm sure you remember Live
Oh
Mixtapes.
yeah.
Um, they started taking some of our market share from, especially some of the Southern artists. And, so it became a problem once we started getting into bidding wars. And, I had a lot of loyalty towards the artists that I kind of, brought up and kind of did a bunch of projects with.
Mm.
Um, and once it became, other platforms, other opportunities, the prices went up a bit, because they're playing sides and saying, well, they offered me this. And,
Uh-huh.
and you never really knew the truth of it. Did they really? I mean, I'm not going to call these guys up and say, hey, did you offer them this? Um, so prices started going up. And also the kind of loyalty and rapport that I had with a lot of these guys started being a little bit questioned.
Mm.
Um, the biggest example of this is being from Philly. I came up with Meek Mill. Was there when he got out of jail. Helped put on, Jaleel Beats, who was his main producer at the time. We would sit in the studio at Batcave, Batcave Studios there in Philly. And he was very loyal to me and the platform. And, I'm the one who convinced him to essentially use the internet because he was very internet illiterate at the time. He just
Still is, some would say, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, so I would sit there at the studio and beg him, like, look, I know you're making a lot of money making physical copies of your flame. They were called the Flamers mixtape, which is a funny name now. If you think of it, right? So he was printing 100,000 copies of physical copies of these CDs.
Mhm.
His manager at the time, a guy named, I don't know if you know Charlie Mack. You know Charlie Mack?
No.
Charlie Mack was Will Smith's, right hand man when Will Smith was coming up. Very, very big figure in Philly, still is to this day.
Mhm.
But he was very old school minded, and that's why it was successful. Meek would print out 100,000 hard copies. Charlie Mack would take them to every corner store in Philadelphia, and they would sell out in a weekend, right?
Right.
But I tried to get his to open his mind to, like, look, I know the concept of giving us something for free to distribute is crazy when you can make $250,000 in a weekend selling these physical mixtapes here.
Mm.
But you're going to grow your fan base. Like, I was traveling here to LA because one of my friends that I started in the industry with was DJ Ill Will. You remember DJ Ill Will? So he's been out here, and I would say when I go to LA and talk about you, nobody knows who you are. They're like, I don't Meek Mill. That's I don't even, that name sounds funny. I never even heard it. In Philly, you're on the radio all day, but there's such a disconnect across this country. Like, you're established here. You need to think bigger, and you need to, like, realize that the internet is your friend. And that's when we got him to release the Mr. Philadelphia album, and you know, he blew up after that. And it's
Mm.
funny going back to your, you know, internet illiterate stories. The funniest thing, you know, Meek Mill story is, you remember Tiny Chat?
Yeah, but what was it again?
It was this, you know, video like live streaming site, but there would be like 20 people in little boxes, and um, he became addicted to Tiny Chat.
Right,
He
right.
would live on Tiny Chat. I mean, Meek, he was still somewhat of a big name at this time, not as big as he became. Um, he was addicted to Tiny Chat. It was, you know, every time you go on Tiny Chat, you would just see Meek Mill in a little box there in the corner. And um, but going back to the issues it caused, so later on, a new competitor popped up called My Mixtapes. If you remember My
Mhm.
Mixtapes, um, and you know they were trying to find the biggest artists at the time, and they had a lot of financial backing with them. And again, we're a small. We've always been a small company. When you asked earlier how many employees we had at our peak, 3.
Right.
You know, so very, very, very small, and it was done purposely as well. I think keeping the vision, you know, it's hard to do when you try to grow too much. And I saw that happen with a lot of the blog sites like Hot New Hip Hop and other ones that tried to become just a blog site to a music hosting site to a video site to a sports site to a fashion site. And
Mm.
our thing was, let's keep to the core of what we do, and we'll be successful for longer than trying to just squeeze everything we can out of what we have now.
Mm.
Um, so with Meek, then it became, the relationship became about, okay, I got this mixtape coming up, but they're offering me this, and I said, who? I don't know who that is, and they were offering him crazy numbers. Like I might give Meek 10, 15,000. They're offering him 50.
Mm.
And when I started to look at the worth of it, it's saying, everybody associates Meek Mill with a DatPiff release, but I can't justify spending 50 grand because we might make 10 of that back in ad traffic.
Mm.
So I'm gonna have to eat 40 grand just to keep this relationship going.
Right.
Um, and again, it's hard to knock someone for being about their money, right? Like at the end of the day, they're in a business for themselves. Like we weren't essentially partners. Like, yeah, we came up from the same town. We came in the industry somewhat, together. We did a bunch of projects together, but if he's going to get a bigger bag somewhere else, I kind of, got to sit back and let it happen.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, it was really the competition that jacked up the prices. DatPiff not being the only option for an online release that people had. And then it just really became about strategically doing ones that made sense. Um, trying to find more unique ways than what we were already doing. So for example, I started doing custom landing pages for some artists, um, more unique ways to incentivize the artist. Like one thing that was, I remember is Lil Wayne and his team were very forward, thinking as far as saying, you know what, we make good money. What's more valuable to us and to Young Money than money right now is data. So if you're able to collect all the data of people who access your site for this release, download it, stream it, rate it, if you can basically export all that data and give it to us so that we can use for our mailing list for the Young
Mm.
Money tour, for Nicki Minaj, for Drake, because Drake was still somewhat newer at that time. Um, they weren't worried just about the money, so we figured a way to collect data, and obviously we warned people that, hey, we're collecting your data and you have to opt in for this. Um, but just finding ways like that to say, how can we make this more worth the artist while than just giving them a quick bag of cash that they'll go to Neiman Marcus and probably spend in a day or two.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, that's how it evolved.
Definitely. So, okay, you have this whole era where the site is still thriving, but you're also cutting checks to all these people. When does is there an additional level of prosperity that comes after that, or is it the streaming services come around and basically steal your lunch at some point?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like you said, we were on kind of autopilot for a while. Like, yes, if every exclusive being ours kind of it started dwindling a bit, and they started being spread across multiple platforms. I mean, I think we still had the lion's share. We still had the more notable releases. Like I made sure always to get the Lil Wayne releases, or You know, a lot of these bigger ones, the Big Sean's and, Mac Miller, the Wizzes, things like that. I always made sure that we got those.
Mhm.
And, so yeah, we were on autopilot for a few years, and, Spotify, Apple Music start popping up. And, I was concerned, but my thought was also they'll never be able to do what we do, just because the legality around a lot of this music.
Mm.
Um, wasn't fully thinking at the time about, okay, what about the labels that oversee this music though? Like, yes, the streaming platforms may not be a direct competitor, but it's about how the labels view them, because all of a sudden these streaming platforms are the ones directly driving their revenue now.
Mm.
Um, so, I want to say sometime around 2016 or so, uh, I was actually warned from an A&R. I don't mind saying his name, Jay Grand from RCA. I don't know if you know Jay Grand. Jay Grand called me because we had a great working relationship. He was an A&R for an artist I worked closely with, Kid Ink, at the time. And he basically said, look, we had kind of a communal meeting of all of our labels, and the industry is about to change and shift, and we're going to start enforcing things a lot more.
Mm.
And you're going to see things change over the next couple of years. Um, I was scared, but again, I was confident in our archive, our catalog, our track, record, the history we have with these labels already, that, you know, I'm sure we'll see a hit, but it shouldn't be a business defining type hit that is just going to shut us out and wipe us away.
Mm.
Uh, so as that transition happened, the exclusive releases started changing a bit more. They started becoming a bit slower. Um, Labels started adapting to mixtapes, and being able to include that in their, recording contracts with the artist. And that's one thing that, to this day, I've been thanked by, a few artists over the years. Um, One thing I think we really did was we forced the labels to adapt. Because artists were putting out these mixtapes, and then they would go to, especially the bigger artists, they would go to the label and say, I need your help. And if you're a big enough artist in a building, you can go to them and say, I need your marketing company to help me push this free mixtape that's not even a Universal or Warner, whatever label it is. And they're going to have to get that backing. So labels started essentially saying, you know what, like, we have to give them more creative control. If they want to do a project with their friend or with another artist, we can't say no, because they're just
Mm.
going to go do it anyway and put it out. um, so we kind of forced their hand to say, we need to give the artist, one, more creative control. Two, we need to loosen our deadlines and kind of guidelines for releasing. If you remember back in the day, artists would have to turn in an album a month, 2 months before it came out.
Mhm.
They'd have to go through the clearing process, the samples. They'd have to pay out all. It was a long process that the labels would have to do.
And now we have like SZA turning her album in 2 days
Not
before.
even. I feel
Yeah.
like some artists can send it to, if you're big enough, you could send it probably with an hour or two's notice nowadays.
Right.
Because labels have had to step back and say, we'll deal with the consequences if there are any after, versus trying to make sure all of our ducks in our row, and we're proactive beforehand to make sure everything is buttoned up. Now we have to just say, okay, you're saying you got permission, you're saying that, this feature is good to go, and they're cool with it, and you're cool with you releasing it. We'll distribute it, even though it's going to have our major, label name behind it. We're trusting you, we're letting you do it, and if anything comes afterwards, we'll deal with it.
Mm.
So I think we really did force their hand to not only adapt the contracts to say, hey, if you want to do a mixtape, we'll count it as a half an album, or we'll give you half of the budget we would give you for an actual studio album. And then I think it also forced them to change their the way that they go about releasing these albums, and giving them a lot more leeway and freedom to decide, hey, if I wake up today and decide I want to release an album, you as my label have to support that. You have to help me.
Right.
You can't say, no, submit it and we'll talk about it in a month. So I think we really did force the industry to change, but some would say at the expense of our own business. But I do think the way the industry was evolving, and the direction it was headed anyway, that was an inevitable change. I think that, we just really kind of forced that to happen a lot sooner than I'm sure the labels wanted to.
Mm.
And, post that, we still carried on for, a few years, doing a little bit of exclusives here and there. Um, mainly ones that were kind of jacking for beats type mixtapes,
Right.
because those ones labels knew they couldn't touch. So Lil Wayne at least once a year would come to us and want to do, you know, one of his projects, and that kept us afloat for the years after. And obviously the catalog as it existed before, with all the projects we did previously, all the ones that were not yet upstreamed. I want to say maybe 60% of the projects, the big, mixtapes, have been upstreamed now. The labels have found out ways to go back and clear them and,
Mm.
get them.
But so was there ever like a doomsday type scenario where just a ton of content disappeared from your platform as a result of, I could imagine if I'm a label and I'm feeling kind of vengeful, we could say, okay, we're going to go dig around on DatPiff and we're going to find 5,000 songs that have illegal samples in them, and we're just going to file copyright strikes on all of them and completely up their whole website. Was there ever a day where anything like that happened?
There was, we would get DMCA takedowns probably every day.
Okay.
Now, yeah, there were a few times, and especially UMG, where they would send 1,000 links in one email or so.
Mm.
And we were always very DMCA compliant. We always kind of took that serious as, we can't really play around with this. We don't want to piss them off. We don't ruffle feathers. We have a relationship with them, so let's not ruin it. So we would have a screening process where we could essentially take all the links, find out which ones were labeled official, because we started labeling things, official, which one, just as you were saying earlier, not being able to tell the difference between what is a real legit project, which is a, fan made one. So we would see which ones are legitimate projects, and then we would reach out and just have dialogue with them. And more times than not, they would be, okay with, hey, let's let that live, but all these other ones that are just fan made ones, or DJ made ones that have this single on there, just pull those.
Mm.
So we'd always be able to find a middle ground. But yeah, we would get those type of emails every few months or so, where it would just be a long laundry list of takedowns. And in some cases, I'd have to reach out to the artists themselves and say, hey, look, we did this project together. Can you tell your label to just let it live? And they'd reach out on our behalf to the label.
Mm.
And in some cases, we could use the promotional agreement if it's something that we paid for, and UMG or Warner or Sony was trying to tell us to take it down. We could say, hey, look, we have a promotional agreement that says, in perpetuity, we have the ability to promote this exclusive. So if we take it down, we can't promote anything because it doesn't exist anymore. So
It also just stands out to me that, like, what is the value of a Gucci Mane mixtape from 2008 in 2018? The
Yeah.
number of people trying to find this content on your platform when it's clearly available on YouTube and a bunch of other places has got to be relatively small, right?
You'd think, that would make the most sense. I think people who consumed it a certain way at the time, they want to consume it the same way. And I know I've had that feeling before too, where if it's something I listen to, whether it be on my platform or somewhere else, I want to find that same way because I know what I'm looking for. You go on YouTube, it can kind of be things can be all over the place. You're hoping that okay, this looks like a good playlist. I might have them all, but oh, there's 4 songs missing here, or oh, some fan, or some rapper slid his single in the middle of this.
Always with that, yeah. And I know that's how they're getting paid. Is I'm listening to some random old album that I like from back in the day, and the third song is just some random beat, and I'm like, oh, this beat has 80,000 views, and this is how, is because they bought placement inside this old Lil Uzi Vert mixtape or some shit like that. It's very clever, actually. You got to give them credit.
Yeah, no, it was, and it was same thing. People do that on mixtapes when they would upload them too. They'd say, "Oh, this is a Big Sean compilation," and then all of a sudden, after the first 4 tracks, it's there's some horrible, artist that recorded on his, I don't want to say his laptop, I don't recorded on a voice memo recorder with a cassette tape or something. It was but again, yeah, it's they're trying to find their way. You can't knock it.
I have like a memory of being on LimeWire, and downloading like Cameron Come Home With Me, and there's just like a song that is some random guy rapping, and just thinking like, wow, that's so crazy that Cameron gave this terrible rapper an entire song on his project. I'm too stupid to realize that it's just some kid did this.
Or it's always the I would get the I did not have sexual relations with that woman. You don't remember that one?
What, people would insert that?
Oh, that was one of the main things you would get on a lot of, like, you download a file, you'd wait a couple hours, and it would be Bill Clinton and his thing. It was always like that little voice tag of
Wow.
I would always get that. I'm sure
That's
people
brutal.
watching this will be able to relate to that.
Holy shit. So, okay, are you guys having like internal freak out sessions about like what is the future of this business? How do we hold on to what we have so far? How do we like what can we become? I know when you
Hmm.
mentioned like some of your competitors like my mixtapes, I see my mixtapes on social media all the time with like viral tweets and shit that's
Yeah.
obviously just reposting content the same way that No
Right.
Jumper and all these other pages do. And it's like it was kind of erased from my memory that like, oh, that's how I even know about my
Yeah.
mixtapes
Yeah.
is because they were basically like a DatPiff clone at a certain
Yeah.
point in time. Like, what different iterations did you guys go through in terms of like figuring out how you were going to keep this fresh? Because like that is one thing that stands out is that whole blog era. Almost none of those brands that were created and were very very strong at that time have managed to pass through to the
Right.
current social media era.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I think it was, we grew so much, especially out of nowhere. Because, like I said from the beginning, like this was never our goal to become what DatPiff became. Obviously, once we reached that level of success, we start becoming a multi-million-dollar a year company. And with that, you get like anybody else, you get used to certain spoils of life and luxuries, and um, we started seeing obviously traffic starts going down a little bit, and this wasn't just because of the transition from labels releasing more on streaming service. It was also the transition from desktop computer to mobile app,
Definitely.
and that was a big transition as well. And in the ad space, people know that desktop traffic paid very well. Mobile app traffic pays probably half of what desktop traffic paid. So even if you're getting the same amount of traffic on your mobile app that you were on your desktop,
Mm.
you're making half the revenue. So we were scrambling to find ways as to be able to keep monetizing the way we were without completely bogging the site down with ads and making it such an unbearable experience that nobody even wanted to use it anymore.
Mm.
So for a couple years, that was one of the struggles, was hoping that audio ads would become more of the norm, because people became somewhat used to that. But the audio ad world didn't really exist then. There weren't maybe one, two, three companies that actually did audio ads. Uh, so from there, it became okay. How else can we stay within our lane of what we're doing with the mixtapes, but also find alternate sources of revenue? So I went and created like the DatPiff YouTube channel, and I said, okay, let's. A lot of this content already lives on YouTube, but let's find a way to curate this better on YouTube. Going back to your point, like you don't really know if this is a legit mix. There might be some random kid song mixed in there. Let's upstream all of our mixtapes as singles, and then in a playlist, and then also as one large file, like one full stream mixtape. uh, and then some of it will probably get auto claimed, but maybe 20-30% of it won't. We'll be able to monetize that. If we have exclusive promotion agreements, we can work with them to say, hey, we're going to monetize this, just because it was our exclusive release. So finding alternate sources of revenue like that. I created a label. It was called the Dispensary, which is a play on DatPiff, and then there was the Dispensary, which is the distributor. Um, where if somebody would come to me, and I had a few like the JR Riders, the Vados, people at that time, Papoose, people like that, saying, hey, instead of just doing an exclusive DatPiff release, we're going to pay you, but we're also going to be the distributor on this, so it can be a DatPiff premiere, but we can also upstream it to the streaming services. We can monetize it that way, maybe a day after we release on DatPiff, but becoming almost offering label services as well outside of just the promotional look on DatPiff.
Mm.
So that became more towards the end, before we ultimately sold.
And you sold in what year?
2019.
2019. Okay. And at that point, where was the business and what made you want to sell? Was it just the fact that you didn't really see how you were going to be able to grow this long term to anything bigger than what you had already created, or
Yeah.
what were they offering to be able to do? And you gave up full ownership at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So seeing the revenue decline, and then just the extra work I was having to do, and again, being a small company, me shouldering pretty much everything, you know, having to upload to YouTube every day myself, you know, having to maintain the site, having to respond to, you know, fans and support emails and that kind of stuff, and then also operating the label, having to line up releases, having to help clear samples. It became a lot to do just to sustain, you know, barely what we were doing, you know, in our prime.
Mm.
You know, so it's kind of a wake up call to I can't keep doing this. I don't know what the alternative is, you know, and over the years we had a lot of people reach out to acquire us. Most notably was Apple Music. I was in talks with them when they were new.
Wow.
And it was right around the time, do you remember they did Chance the Rapper's The Coloring Book?
And that's the one that they did the premiere
Yeah,
of, the
yeah,
exclusive, right?
yep. Yeah, and that goes back to another thing is
They tried that same model that you did, and
they
it only
did.
lasted a couple albums before they said, "All
Yeah,
right, fuck this, we're not
yeah,
doing this shit
yeah.
anymore." Yeah.
So that was another thing. Chance was somebody that, you know, I did all of his, you know, mixtapes up to that point.
Oh, okay.
I went to him with an offer of 50 grand, I think, for that mixtape. And then I remember a few days before Apple Music released it, his manager Pat called and said Apple offered him 1.5 million.
Wow.
And then, you know, again, that's one of those things like, damn, like I couldn't even get close to that. And I can't be mad at him. You're talking about 50 grand compared to 1.5
Yeah.
plus a bigger platform.
At a certain point, you just got to say, "Listen, I fuck with you. You'd be dumb as to not take this deal."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did get in trouble though, because I had the, you know, the zip file earlier and I actually premiered it on DatPiff because I was a bit spiteful at the time. And, you know, that's what ultimately really fueled the talks with Apple Music to then want to acquire us. I uploaded it. People started getting mad because I don't know if Apple Music was a few minutes late or something, but I remember we got like 1 million views on the page in like maybe 30, 40 minutes or so.
Wow.
And I had, I can't remember his name. He's the second in charge at Apple Music. Basically telling his whole team, reach out, you got to tell them to, you know, take it down, all that stuff. And in my conversations with him, I had a call the following Monday, because I think it was a Friday they released it, and then the weekend went by. Monday, I remember he called us a competitor. And that was a funny thing to me because, again, we're at our peak, a $3-4 million a year company. And we have Apple Music, which I can't imagine what their annual revenue is, but I'm sure it's in the billions, you know, calling us a competitor. So we started getting into talks with them. You know, my fault was I never signed a NDA or anything with them. So I kind of gave them the whole blueprint of how we do these releases, how we line up exclusives. You know, just all the details of our business model, you know, thinking, okay, this could be a partnership, you know, being acquired by them would be great. You know, I'm sure they can, you know, catapult us into the, you know, next wave of DatPiff and what it can become. After maybe a month, they just disappeared.
Yeah, because what do you think that they would have been able to do with DatPiff in general?
I don't know,
Right.
you know, but I'm a believer in Apple as an innovator in, you know, the world. You know, I think Apple has, you know, really changed so many things over the last 30 years compared to the previous 100, 200 years. And, you know, I think Apple has really advanced us forward. So my thought was, shit, if anybody can do it, Apple can do it. They'll help me figure out how to do it. And they tried, like you said, it lasted a few months. And then they started to learn the negatives of this business, you know, not just in talking to their lawyers. Their lawyers kept saying, this is a very gray area that I'm sure you want to steer clear of. So then they started thinking about, okay, we'll just do exclusives, like forget mixtapes or, you know, that whole, you know, business model and culture that they're doing. We'll just do exclusives like The Coloring Book. Ultimately, that then became a conflict of interest with all the labels, because the labels are getting mad that, like, let's say Universal gave Apple a release, Spotify would almost, you know, shadow ban that album or not give it a look. So then the labels were getting pissed off, saying, you can't do that because now we give one platform an exclusive. We're getting no love or visibility from any other streaming platform. So Apple eventually made the decision, like, we can't do exclusives because we just have to be in bed and working well with everybody, give everybody a fair shot. We can't do that. So, but my point with that was, we've never entertained people reaching out to acquire us because it was never really a vision that we had, or something that we really thought to entertain. Apple was the only one just because of their name and their resources. But once I reached the point of I'm getting burnt out, I don't know what else to do myself. The industry is shifting. We just need more hands on deck, more resources put into it, more budget so I can compete. So if it's Chance the Rapper or somebody, I can say you're getting 1.5, but maybe we can give you $250,000 or so, or what I'm saying, just being able to level the playing field a little bit more. I knew that that's not something I could do myself.
Hmm.
So we had this company that was based here in Santa Monica called MediaLab, and they were only really known at the time for they had a messaging app at the time called Whisper. I don't know if you ever heard of Whisper.
It's still out there, right? It's like anonymous, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really their only company at the time. And their owner had this kind of vision of, I want to get into the music industry and the music space. They had already done all their due diligence on us kind of in the background before they even reached out. So they were the first ones to reach out and essentially say, you don't need to show us your books. You don't need to do an NDA. We already know enough, what we need to know. We are interested in acquiring you guys. And obviously at first you're skeptical, like that sounds unbelievable. You can say you did all the due diligence. You don't want to look at our books. That sounds a little bit sketchy, but hey, that makes it easy on us. What's your offer? They made us an offer. And I think one of their key points was they wanted to dip their toes into the music industry and music related apps. And a key part of it that they wanted was me to kind of help facilitate that with my industry know-how, my connections, my resources, and things like that. So they made a fair offer for the brand, and obviously the fact that revenues were declining, turning down a couple $1 million was kind of like we could never get this offer again. And if they can provide this kind of Silicon Valley backing and the funding and raising money that they're able to do, this really could be the next kind of turning point for DatPiff to last another 15, 20 years, maybe in a new business model, maybe in a new way.
And it's crazy because I just coincidentally happened to watch a video like a day or two ago about the state of streaming, and it's like even Spotify can't really turn a profit.
No, I don't think they ever have.
Apple and Amazon consistently do, but it's also like they don't give a fuck. It's a rounding area to them, and really they just want to have you as part of the Amazon or Apple ecosystem. Spotify trying to make money off just music. They've had all kinds of bad ideas that didn't really pan out. They're giving Joe Rogan $500 million or whatever it is, and that the podcast thing, like they did bite off a nice chunk of the podcast industry through some of those deals, but hasn't really worked out for them in general. So when you think about how hard it has been for Spotify to compete, you really look at a site like DatPiff and you're like, oh, okay, like that was very much an era in time. It wasn't really meant to last because you're having to go to war with these giants that don't give a fuck about even being profitable.
And I don't even believe that Apple Music or Amazon their music side is profitable. I think it's almost like moving around numbers. Amazon as a company on the grocery store, online ordering side is huge.
And if Apple had decided like, oh, in order to fully vanquish DatPiff, we are going to have to spend, a couple $100 million a year on buying exclusives. I mean, because they could have done that. So they only stopped doing that because they didn't have to, because they carved out their niche so quickly.
Yeah. And I realized that too, that, even prior to the sale, I was looking into other avenues where how can we be, sustain ourselves? Maybe I have to, kind of enter into these, license deals with these labels so that we can operate as a streaming platform. We can pay royalties. The more I looked into that, I just started to see red. And I'm not talking about red in my face. I'm talking about red on the bottom line, deep red. Like there's no way to turn a profit when you're having to pay licenses to these labels, to pay out royalties. I mean, obviously it's an essential business that we need, is the music industry and streaming. But as far as a host of the music, it was almost impossible for me to see a way any business could be profitable hosting every song, every artist, and having to pay out the way that they do. Even though yes, it's only cents, and I know artists argue about that, but it's a lot.
It's funny because I'm picturing right now, if I owned a DatPiff style site, and if I was trying to get a lot of underground rappers to get on it, drill rappers, whatever, it wouldn't even be necessarily an issue of the money. They would be upset about the idea of like, well, I want my YouTube video to have an extra 100,000 views because that's ultimately how people view my success in the
Yeah.
industry. And it wouldn't even become a conversation about money necessarily. It would mostly be a conversation about their outwardly facing cloud, and all they care about is their Spotify monthly listeners and
Yeah.
their YouTube view count and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's just a result of like how humans have evolved, you know, in these last, you know, going back to Lil Wayne, he's from the old school of what more value can you bring me outside of money, outside of clout, and you know, he comes from a different era. This era, I feel like, is all about clout. That's all they
Mm.
care about. And I started to have that too. People would reach out and be like, "Yo, can I pay you to boost my numbers?" You know, because I could go into the back and I could change the view count or listen count on any mixtape.
Mm.
And I was kind of like, that. Why? Like, you're gonna know it's not real. Like that, you actually take pride and feel good in that, like knowing that it's fake and inflated. No, but my fans will think I'm on, and I'm like, that's when I started to realize, that's you guys have changed a lot. These younger artists are a little bit,
Mm.
you know, different, and it's cool. They're able to figure out how, because of platforms like TikTok and stuff, to monetize off clout, I guess. Um, you know, I think they're not going to have the same success musically as they are as a personality, but nowadays it's the streamers that I feel like are the new rappers.
Mm.
As far as, you know, you could be the biggest, most successful rapper, but there's going to be a streamer that's been streaming for a year or something, is getting these $50 million kick deals, or you know, these other deals. Like
The
they've
gambling
become,
deals.
yeah.
That's where the money's really going crazy these days. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's funny because it's the rappers now that go to the streamers looking for clout, you know, looking for a push. Like you saw what Leangelo Ball did when he went to Neon. You know, that song only blew up because Neon put it on, and that's just a weird thought to have, that
And I feel
Neon.
so out of place because I actually haven't heard that song yet.
Oh, you
And
haven't?
multiple people texted me like, "Can you believe that one of the Ball brothers fucked up Lil Baby's rollout?"
Yeah,
So I'm over here in the dark for for the time being.
yeah,
I got to
yeah.
go listen to that
You
right
gotta
after
listen to
this.
it.
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely not a bad song, but I had a conversation with someone earlier where I'm confused as a consumer, and this is just the state of the industry as a whole. Is I'm confused as a consumer because I can't tell if it's genuinely a hit record
Mm.
or if it's a meme joke right now. Because you know, once you start going down that rabbit hole, you'll see, you know, all the TikToks made about it. People being like, "Oh, pulling up to the club tonight, bumping that Leangelo." Last night I saw the Detroit Lions. They won the game. They're in the locker room playing it. The NBA games, they're playing it in the arena, and people are going around, you know, jumping around. And I'm thinking, you know, I said to somebody, I'm like, I'm just really confused, like the state of music right now, because I think he's getting clowned. I think it's a meme joke record, and people are almost like fake applauding him in a sarcastic way,
Mm.
but it's doing so well. I mean, funny enough, he premiered it on World Star, the video, and it has, I don't know, probably 20, 30 million views in a few days. Um, so it's doing extremely well. It's being played in arenas. You got every major athlete like making TikToks about it. Their team celebrating in the locker room, but it's like a joke. You know, it's a very weird thing. So you'll once you go down that rabbit hole, you'll see what I mean.
Definitely. So, what was it like seeing your baby be taken over by a big company and seeing what they chose to do with it?
At first, I was excited. You know, obviously getting some cash in your pocket. Um, you know, and then the idea of, we've been when we worked out of Philly, we worked in a, essentially it looked like a trap house, and it was for mainly on purpose because we didn't want any attention. We didn't really want anybody. We didn't have any signage outside that was like, "This is the DatPiff office." Um, it was essentially a little trap house, and you know, obviously growing up there, and then I had a house in Delaware. Um, I was excited to say, you know what, this is a new company, this is a new start. Um, you guys are looking to grow in the music space. I'm excited to be on board and help you with that. And I'm fully invested. I'm going to move out to LA. I'm going to be in the office with you guys full time. So in the beginning, I was excited. We were also promised a lot of things. You know, this will be, you know, from them essentially saying, this is going to be our main priority. This is going to be our baby. Like, you know, they were so excited. They had launch parties. They had, you know, all kinds of things. So I went in thinking, this is a company that has millions, the potential to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. They're motivated. They're excited about us. It's a new start for me out in LA. You know, it was at first it was excitement. Um, Slowly but surely, it became me being a bit doubtful about their capabilities. I knew going in they weren't music industry people. I feel
Mm.
like music industry people, they're just built a little different. You know, we honor what we say. We have an unwritten kind of code amongst each other. Like, yes, it's a very cutthroat industry. There's a lot of shitty stuff that happens. But when we do business with each other, it's always a handshake deal, and that's all you need to believe what they're saying. Um, I started to learn that, oh shit, I've entered the Silicon Valley world now, the corporate world, which is a little bit different. They care about a little bit different of things, you know. So I started to realize that they didn't really have the technical ability to even maintain what we were already doing. They didn't really have the know-how to understand how important content itself is. Um, you know, their whole thing was just about how can we take an existing brand, insert our own ads in it directly versus going through a third party, and just take what already exists and double the revenue just by plugging and playing our ads in directly.
Mm.
Um, and I learned this a few years, maybe a year, 2 years after I was in. Um, the first year I was in, I kind of let them go through the growing pains of, yes, this is not a you know, carbon copy, you know, cookie cutter type website and platform. There's a lot that goes into this between, you know, the catalog we have, all the storage it takes up, you know, the streaming capability, the mobile app, you know, all these different aspects of it, the social media side. Um, but again, I kind of maintained a little bit of trust and faith that, okay, these guys have been successful. They're successful guys in life. You know, they got good backers. They'll figure it out. So I actually then helped bring in WorldStar to the fold.
Mm.
One of our conversations was at the time, what other brands do you think make sense for where we're trying to go and what we're trying to do? I've known the guys at WorldStar for, I mean, at this point, probably 15 years or so. And
And
I
this is
knew,
a couple years after Q died that you were having this conversation.
yeah, this was sometime in, I want to say late 20, no, this was about 2020
Okay.
during COVID. Um, I said, you know what, I know since Q passed, it's owned by the estate. I know that there's a little bit of tension between the estate and the people that are currently running it. So they for sure may be interested in kind of getting bought out, you know, paying out the estate and starting fresh, just like, you know, we were. So I helped them put together that deal. Um, so we brought in WorldStar to the fold. And at that point, I had my oh shit moment even more because I realized now, okay, not only do they fully not know what they're doing, not know the industry, but now WorldStar is the top priority of what they're trying to figure out and trying to figure their way in. DatPiff has now become,
Mm.
you know, the least priority of the company because again, going back to their business model, how they operate, they don't care about the brand, the culture. They care about the P&L, the profit and loss sheet. They care about the balance sheet. They care about uh, being able to show investors revenues to be able to raise more money and stuff. They couldn't care less about the history of these brands.
Or the popularity overall. Because a lot of times people will say to me, why doesn't WorldStar do this or whatever? And I'm like, I've heard from people that they're singularly focused on web traffic, making money off web traffic. Their perspective on social media is basically it's an afterthought because they don't
Yeah,
really create any real profits from it.
yeah, and you know, sadly, they've been blacklisted on a lot of different platforms. You know, for
WorldStar?
yeah.
Interesting.
hmm
What do you mean by that? Platforms like
YouTube, you know, shadow ban type things,
okay.
and even stuff that, you know, in my time helping, you know, when we brought them in, I was kind of working for MediaLab as a whole. So, you know, I was still trying to keep DatPiff afloat, working with WorldStar and just the, you know, executives at the company to figure out kind of the path for that, some of the hurdles. Um, but yeah, they would, you know, because of their content, I think a lot of these platforms would just kind of behind the scenes, just, you know, shadow ban them. And, you know, I went to YouTube, you know, for them, spoke with a lot of people over there trying to figure it out. And I think that's contributed to the decline of WorldStar is like
Mm.
artists stopped wanting to release with them because they know it's just not going to get crazy views like it used to back in the day.
Mm.
And they experienced the same issues with the labels as well. And I saw this firsthand many times. Was labels would say, no, whatever artist they're working with, we want you to premiere that on your Vivo or your YouTube channel, because why would you give them subscribers from if this goes viral, and this needs to live on your channel. So they experienced the same thing we did in that regard, of the labels wanting to be like, no, let's control this content ourselves a little bit more, let's keep it more in-house. So that coupled with this company MediaLab really not wanting to invest anything new into these properties, and just really wanting to leverage the name brand and power that it had, to just basically milk it for all it had. And I can say this now, I had an NDA for a while with this company. We parted on, I don't want to say bad terms, but there's a lot of issues and kind of just, not seeing eye to eye with them, and, just some, feelings I have of what they did to these brands. Because the next brand I'll mention, I don't know if you knew this as well. Once WorldStar was in, then they went and bought Genius.
Okay.
And I knew the Genius guys from back when they had a house in Malibu. It was two of them. Mabad was a crazy guy. He was funny.
That's the one who died, right?
Is he? Did he die? I'm not sure if he's the one.
Well, I don't know.
He could have.
If not, but yeah.
He's the one who got fired by them for talking crazy.
Yeah, because I was blocked by Genius back in the day because I got in an argument with him about him disrespecting Dallas Penn, who I don't know if you remember him, also deceased now. But that was what we were arguing about, was this dude who's just off the rails talking shit to Dallas Penn at that time.
Yeah, back when they were Rap Genius. So
and it's Mabad Hadam.
Yeah.
And he died in March 2024 at the age of 41 from complications related to a brain tumor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. They were smart guys. I mean, they started a bit differently, like that whole platform. They started, I think they were, I don't know if they were Stanford grads or Cal Berkeley, like one of those, schools. They were very smart guys. Then they had backing from Andreessen Horowitz, and they were, money was pumped into them from day one. But they also started experiencing kind of the decline of the culture overall, the web traffic, figuring out how to monetize. Then they had a lawsuit with Google, I think, at some point. So the company MediaLab went out and bought them, and I was conflicted because I'm on the inside of this company now. I can't go to them and be like, stay away, stay away. So part of me had to sell out in a way and tell them, yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, granted, they got paid $80 million for it. That's always a regret I'll have with WorldStar. I mean, granted, when WorldStar situation came in, I didn't fully know the aspects of this company and kind of how they just were not going to prioritize anything, try and squeeze all they could out of it, and just really try and raise as much money as they could, and eventually just sell. Like they had maybe a 1 or 2 year plan, where us with the brands, DatPiff, WorldStar, Genius, we're all trying to be around the next 10, 15 years. We're not looking at a 1-2 year plan. We don't care about raising $750 million. We don't care about a $2.3 billion valuation. Like we don't care about any of that. We just want to sustain our brands, keep doing what we're doing, keep growing. So Genius came into the fold. And then what happened was Genius became now the top priority. WorldStar now became the second priority. DatPiff got knocked down even further. So again, I'm sitting there having to think like, damn, I killed my own brand, by growing this new company I'm a part of. And yes, I had equity, yes, I had a title. But again, as an industry guy, there's a loyalty I have to the industry and the culture as a whole that I'm just like. So, on the TikTok video that you might have saw, most of the comments were good, but there were a few of them that said, well, you sold out, you're a sellout. And I even responded to them, I'm saying, you know what, to a degree, I did. And it wasn't with the intention of selling out with the purpose of harming, hurting. At the time, I really thought it was something that would be beneficial for the future and the growth and all that stuff. And even when I brought in WorldStar, hey, these guys got deep pockets. They're willing to build a whole team around us, invest more money. We can get us all out of this kind of spinning wheels that we've been in the last 4 or 5 years, the changing industry. They can go to guys like, the Leor Cohens, who they know these guys personally, the Jimmy Iovine's, like these guys all, they don't know the culture, but they know these, you know, very important, small, or high up guys, right? Uh, and I'm sure you've noticed in your time in the industry is very, very small, and you can reach a point where you're at the top, but you're never going to be at the very top. There's very few people up there, and like I said, the Leor Cohens, the Jimmy Iovine's, like those are people that you can't call up and be like, "Hey, let me talk to them on the phone." There's certain people that are unreachable, but these guys could reach them. They're venture capitalists from this area. They have fathers who were in the business or famous in Hollywood, or what I'm saying. So they could reach that crowd. They could go to the Soho House and mingle with those people. Or I would go to the Soho House and be like, this is weird to me. Like all these, that kind of thing was weird to me. But so again, it was just seeing, okay, maybe they can help us get these deals with the labels. They can go to a Jimmy Iovine and say, hey, let's do an exclusive Beats times Genius thing, or whatever, like that. It was kind of thinking like that. So yeah, I did sell out, all things considered, looking back now, but the intention really was to help evolve these companies even more. When Genius was acquired, though, the same day we announced that Genius was being acquired, they fired, I want to say 80% of the staff.
Wow.
Now, granted, there was a lot of overhead. There were people that were being paid for not really doing much. There was costs that didn't really need to be paid. But one thing that it was one of my last straws was they cut a lot of the content team. Some of the segments that Genius was doing, the interviews, they really only do the not behind the lyrics,
what's it called?
The Genius Live, like where they're
where they go
open
through
mic,
the lyrics.
open mic.
The open mic
Yeah,
thing too. Okay.
like that's really one of the only segments that they kept on. So again, Genius is now the priority. WorldStar gets kicked down. DatPiff is at the bottom. So now I have all my WorldStar guys looking at me like, what the this kind of sucks now. Like, I thought you said this was going to be kind of, rainbows and unicorns. And, they ended up experiencing what I experienced when they came in. Now that Genius is in. So for as long as I could, I tried to just sustain a good attitude, think about the big picture, saying, okay, I have equity in this company. The company reached a $2.3 billion valuation, which I was like, cool, I got stock in this. Again, I hate to be money focused, but at the end of the day, I can't go and flip tables in the CEO's office anymore. And trust me, I did that more than a few times, going in there, just, going off about how they're not doing they're killing these brands. They need to do more, like your P&L, your, these spreadsheets you give us. Like none of us give a fuck about that. We just want you to, at minimum, sustain what we did to be successful to this time. And you guys aren't even doing that. And so it reached a point where they got into an issue because they raised a shitload of money based off of all these new acquisitions. They acquired, do you remember Kick Messenger, KIK?
Oh, yeah.
They acquired Kick Messenger. They acquired Imager. Do you remember Imager for GIFs? They acquired Imager. Then they had Genius, WorldStar, DatPiff, Whisper, and a few like smaller, apps. But they reached a $2.3 billion valuation, and they raised a shitload of money. I want to say close to $800 million or so. They ended up getting themselves in such a bind because they weren't able to turn more profits on the site, the sites that they brought in, by thinking what they could do by implementing their ads directly or doing the bare minimum. They slowly started to realize this isn't making these sites more profitable. So we essentially overpaid for a lot of these, brands, thinking that we could just, squeeze it out and make more money without having to really do more or invest more. And they started to realize they're not making enough to, essentially pay back the money that was, raised and the interest on everything that they were given. And so they just stopped completely investing into anything with these brands, even investing into teams to help on the technical side, or the only focus was put on direct sales. They were hiring people in direct sales, and that's when I got frustrated, saying, these sites and apps are broken. There's no new features.
Mm.
There's nothing new or innovative. We're not investing anything in the content, but you're trying to hire 5 more people to go sell ad space on it just for to bring up the direct sales money. Like, this doesn't make sense.
Mm.
And we reached a point where I couldn't do it anymore. Especially I was getting paid super well. Obviously I had equity. I was getting paid well, um, but I couldn't do it anymore. It was so draining on me. Just not just having to fight these battles for the simplest things and just being able to sustain and maintain the bare minimum, um, but also just the guilt of having brought these three prominent brands into the situation. Obviously, DatPiff, WorldStar, then Genius. It all started with me, and nobody was really blaming me. Nobody was saying this is your fault, this is your fault. But ultimately, I knew I started this whole thing.
Mm.
The guilt of it started to be like, this isn't worth it to me. I'm not happy here. I'm not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in any way, and I can't sit here like a sellout and be like, I'll just wait, until this company sells for, $1 billion or so and cash out on my equity, and then I'll be happy.
Mm.
It got to the point I had to say, you know what, we tried doing different things. I helped create WorldStar Distribution. I don't know if you heard of that.
Mm.
Um,
I went to the website a couple days ago, and I think I saw that's like one of the main links on there.
Yeah.
Is they basically want to be like a TuneCore.
exactly.
Yeah.
That was the goal, is to be like, all right, maybe we can just start something where we just funnel in the traffic and the user base that we have already, but in a way where we can become a distributor. So I partnered with Create Music, because I've been working with Create for years now. And I just kind of figured out a joint venture with them to say, we're going to be like a white label distributor. It's going to be through you guys, but it's going to make it seem like WorldStar is its own distribution company. And the idea with that was, a lot of the WorldStar users may say, oh, cool, you guys don't, take any fees or anything like that. You only, once you reach a certain threshold, you do different, a little bit different of a model, more incentivized towards the artist. Um, but again, they weren't really supporting that. I wanted to go get exclusive releases. I had, a few big artists ready to give us exclusives, and I'm breaking down all the numbers for them. Look, we give them 100 grand up front. Their last album, first 3 month payout was 120 grand itself. So we're gonna make this back in 3 months. All I need is 100 grand right now to go do this. They wouldn't support it.
Mm.
So then I'm looking crazy to now the artist, who the team. So really just had to walk away from the situation.
Mm.
And it was the hardest thing ever, because I felt like I was walking away from my baby, my child. um, but at that point, there was nothing further I could have done, really, except leaving. And I even tried to buy it back after I left. I had a few people reach out and say, hey, I'll give you the money you need, see if you can buy it back.
And they weren't interested, so they're turning some kind of profit off of it, or they're
I don't think
interested in
so.
holding on to it.
I don't think so. I don't know if it was something tied to the money that they raised that was counted as part of it. Maybe they were trying to operate it privately, or I'm not sure the exact reason, because what I offered versus what it was making in the state that they left it in, which was, I'm talking maybe $5,000 a day,
Mm.
it would have been worth their while. But again, this company is focused solely on their balance sheet. I'm sure it had something to do with how it would throw off the balance sheet, or that maybe they didn't want to report that income, because it was something having to do with, not, this is the right decision, this makes sense, this is good for the brand and the culture to give it back so they can, do what they need to do to make it better, archive it the right way. Because that's my biggest problem too, is how they archived it.
Mm.
And that's the biggest issue people reach out to me about, is they killed the archive.
Which is, so much of the internet from 10, 15 years ago is just gone. And
Mhm.
you'll see this constantly where, I know people who worked for a different online publication for years and years and years, and they'll want to be able to go find articles that they wrote 10 years ago, and they're just gone. Hyperlinks all dead on websites. And it's just like, at some point, a lot of these companies have just been sold to people who don't give a about
Yeah.
keeping that stuff curated in any way. And I'm just as guilty. My BMX website from back in the day, at a certain point, we lost access to what was hosting it, and
Mhm.
all that shit is just gone. There's a lot
Yeah.
of people that was like their whole childhood, was having their videos posted on here, and they would love to go read through the comments, and there's just no way. And yeah, that's a unfortunate situation.
Yeah, I think the hardest part though is that this could have been avoided. This was a decision that they made, and it was because it was the path of least resistance. Meaning, we don't really know how to. We're getting lots of DMCA's because you got to understand, once it went from KP is running DatPiff, we have a relationship with him. They're an underground company that came up and helped us when we needed it to. Oh, this multi-million-dollar corporation in Los Angeles owns this now. It became a lot more of a green light on them to basically enforce, these DMCA's and say, no, you guys are a huge, large company now. This isn't the mom and pop operation it was before that we looked out for. So it was more so them basically saying, we don't want this liability is not worth it for us. Us investing in limited licenses off the for some of the content is not worth it to us. Let's just half-ass archive it to archive.com, hope that it stays there, and just basically wash their hands of it. So that's my biggest frustration. So one thing that I've been in talks with other people is to potentially continue talks with them about a buyback, not to bring DatPiff back. We know DatPiff, it was a period in time that it happened. It was great. It was, a super great time in the music industry, but it's not something that's ever going to revert back. It's not like some style that's all of a sudden going to come back. I think everything now is going to be streaming from here on out. I can't think of what the next thing after streaming could even be.
Totally.
But archiving it in the right way, where the archive is in full, it's accessible, every song, whether we have to go to the labels and, like I said, do these limited licenses to basically say, hey, let us license these individual albums. We don't need a blanket license. We don't need to license your whole catalog. We don't care about 99% of your catalog. We just want to license these. So, that's one thing I do hope, is to kind of sunset it in the right way. Because, I understood it was, dying out. It was the industry was shifting, but I'd always hoped that it could at least be archived and the catalog could live on in the right way. So still hoping for that, still in talks.
Right, because at a certain point, it's become pretty clear that DatPiff has a lot of nostalgic value to people, and there was a whole narrative from, I don't know if it was like a year or 2 years ago, where a press release or like some rumor went out there basically saying that the DatPiff archives were being completely taken down, and then it was revealed like a day or two later that was not true.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that all went down?
Yeah, that was right after I left. When they were getting ready to, wind down operations. Again, there was no operations of DatPiff. I'm just talking about the ability to, hey, if the site is down, we're not even going to contact the host to get it fixed. Like, we just don't give a shit. So, what had happened was there were so many issues with it that the site was down for a while. Then it came back up, and I think the host ended up fixing it themselves or something. And they just put a kind of disclaimer on here that the desktop app is no longer gonna available. Basically, you can go on the mobile app. Then they eventually did that with the mobile app as well, saying you can go to archive.com to listen to it. But it all became them just not knowing how to fix the issues and finding out the path of least resistance of, okay, let's dump as much data as we can that we have on the back end that's easy to just transfer over to archive.com, even if it's the metadata isn't transferred right, the artwork isn't even coinciding with the right album. They just didn't really care at that point. And then eventually they wiped out almost all of the archive.com catalog, because they were still continuing to get this long list of DMCA's each day, that they eventually got to the point of, we just don't even want to deal with this anymore. We don't want that liability. Archive.com, didn't want that liability, so it just kind of ceased to exist.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, where are you at in terms of what you're trying to do business-wise, and is there much on the horizon for DatPiff from your perspective, or has the story kind of reached its conclusion unless you're able to pull off this move that you're talking about, where you'd be able to sort of gain ownership and then shutter it?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it's run its course. I think DatPiff has reached, it peaked years ago.
Mm.
You know, I think even me trying to, it's not necessarily me trying to bring it back. It's trying to, put it out in, let it go out in the right way.
Mm.
So it's something that, I've like I said, I've spoken to a few different investors who have actually reached out to me about it, trying to figure out the right way logistically that we could do it. Like I said, with the licenses being an issue and just all of that. Um, but honestly, for about 15 years straight, I was working 18 hours a day at the computer. Being a small team, being so obsessed with this internet culture of, hey, a song might drop, a mixtape might drop, an artist might email me a zip file.
Mm.
I was so just in a trance almost of this obsession with always being available, always being the first one to have the content, always kind of just being forward thinking in that regard. So for 15 years, up until the time where I left MediaLab, like I said, in frustration and kind of had to walk away from DatPiff as it stands, I was going, 18 hours a day, just kind of, going absolutely crazy.
Mm.
And so since that time, it's been about 2 years now. Uh, I've been enjoying doing almost nothing.
Mm.
And I don't mean nothing, whereas I sit at home on my hands all day, but I'm talking about not having that overhead, that weight on my shoulders of an entire brand like that. Or when I went to Media Lab, having the idea of now I'm responsible for World Star, Genius, their success, their future. It was really the weight of the world on my shoulders. Um, so I've taken the last 2 years. I've been playing, divvying around in different things. I've been doing a lot of penny stock trading, which has been very, very good for me.
Mm.
I've made a lot doing that. Other than that, just really just enjoying life for the first time, like I said, and really since I started this whole, journey with DatPiff. But I'm getting to the point where I'm getting a bit bored. I've never considered working for a label, especially considering my history and, uh, just always never wanting to be that corporate guy. I
Mm.
like to show up when I want, leave when I want, do what I want, not have anybody over me telling me what I can and can't do. Um, but the more I've been disconnected from, the industry, as much as I'm enjoying the peace, I also kind of miss the chaos a little bit.
Mm.
So yeah, figuring out how to sunset that piff properly, and then really just finding out what I want my next move to be. Because I'm not done with the music industry. I still have my own personal catalogs and stuff I manage, which doesn't really take any real work at this point. Basically, just mailbox money. But um, yeah, I've enjoyed the time off. But one of the things that still kind of pains me every day is just how DatPiff didn't go out in the right way, and this kind of desire to not fully feel at peace until that happens, so
Mm.
that I can put that chapter completely behind. Say, it did what it did. It was a great time. We accomplished a ton. We've got a unmatched catalog, songs that will never be on DSPs. Um, it's funny every time Lil Wayne, one of his albums gets upstreamed, one of his mixtapes gets upstreamed, DatPiff still to this day trends on Twitter. And people always reach out, or I get a notification that says DatPiff is now trending. And it's because they'll always be missing 3 or 4 songs.
Mm.
Because yeah, they could clear 16 of the songs, but 4 of the 20 they couldn't find an old producer. It has a sample. It's a freestyle beat. So like people always go back to those days. Like I bet DatPiff would have it, or DatPiff had all um, so just really sunsetting that, and then figuring out my next direction is important to me. And um yeah.
It's crazy because, like, when I think about all the eras of hip hop throughout the years and the way that you're putting it, and the way I'm thinking back to those eras where it was like a new Lil Wayne song dropping on Now Right every day, a new Lil Wayne mixtape every week or two, like
Mhm.
new Dipset mixtapes left and right all the time. And it was such an exciting time to be a rap fan. And, also, honestly, the era before that where it was just like big label releases. That was kind of an exciting time to be a rap fan too, because there was such a limited flow of new content coming out. Then you get to this sort of wild, wild west internet age where you're just getting nonstop content. And then you fast forward to now where
it's boring.
Yeah, like a Lil Wayne is not just like blanketing the internet in new content, and the new equivalents of Lil Wayne, whoever that might be, they don't really see the value in doing that either. And you even have somebody who, you know, we would like to hear more music from, like somebody like Cardi B, who will just go 7 8 years without dropping an album because of the logistics of her being concerned. I assume this is most of it, is her being concerned about how people will view her music if she puts out a project and it doesn't sell as well as her last one, etc.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like it reminds me of the saying, the medium is the message, i.e. the medium that you upload your art to or create your art on will ultimately determine how that art manifests itself into society. And, you know, the streaming services very much have kind of created a whole new set of incentives for artists. And as a result, it's just not really quite as fun to hop online. But also at that time, it was just, you know, and also the business of running these websites is a lot like the way that the interview space works, where for a long time, artists were excited to do interviews just for the promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Then at a certain point, they get the idea into their head of like, well, the promotion's not that valuable to me, so you should pay me.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, the artists start asking for too much. And then that makes it so that like there's less interviews coming out, and artists start to be concerned about scarcity, and they don't want to do 10 interviews. They want to do 1 interview per album cycle. And a lot of this seems very inevitable. And it is kind of sad to think that maybe like the streaming era is that's the final chapter in terms of what hip hop on the internet is going to look like going forward. But then at the same time, I mean, I guess we'll always probably be surprised by new innovations and new ways of putting shit out, obviously. But
yeah, it's just hard to even think about what I mean that's the I would say one good thing about the streaming era is, yes, it's so easily accessible. You can go on your phone in your car, you know, you can access it anywhere. You can cast to a speaker, you can, you know, it's so simple now. But it's made the industry so saturated where, you know what, releases come out Thursday nights, and almost everybody they just kind of group into one. Whereas like, you know, when we were talking about in the earlier era, it was, oh no, there was a countdown. It could be a Monday night at 7 p.m. and the whole internet is going to be waiting for this, you know, Lil Wayne whatever mixtape we were dropping at the time. It was an event. And I feel like even the biggest albums now that are coming out, like I didn't even know Lil Baby dropped an album last week, because it's just not an event anymore. It's almost like just, you know, Thursday night, there's going to be something, you know, but it's not, there's no excitement around it anymore.
Or the artists who can get that level of excitement are far fewer at this point. You
like
know,
Taylor Swift, maybe.
you
know,
the world will stop when Drake or Kendrick or Taylor Swift or whoever drops a project, but there's very few artists, like fewer artists than there's ever been before, who are able to really get the world to pay attention like that.
It's sad. It's just not, like I said, not nearly as fun. And I think it's making career spans much shorter. This oversaturation, this album only focused, you know, era that we live in now. You know, it's just you know, there's almost too much to consume without proper curation. Like, yes, I think the playlists are great, you know, on Apple Music. I think they have pretty good playlists and stuff. But again, the idea of making things an event, something memorable. Like I have so many people that when they comment stuff, oh, I remember waiting at my computer for this. You know, nobody's gonna look back and say, oh, I remember waiting at my computer or my, you know, my phone for Kendrick to drop, you know, this. Like it's just, it's a whole different climate now, and I think it's taken a lot of the excitement out of the industry. And then you have artists like Lil Baby. Some would argue that he's on his way out already. You know, somebody like him would have had a French Montana, Gucci Mane type career in the previous era. It would have been a 15-year easy without even any effort. This new era is like, we're done with you. This is boring. You know, you were cool. You made a couple cool songs, but this album sucks. So we're done with you.
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult thing for artists to navigate, because we promote and fetishize people like Kendrick or Drake, who can take multiple years off from putting out music, But then when somebody like Lil Baby or Roddy Ricch or Polo G, when they do that,
Yeah.
and then they come back and they sell poorly in comparison to their prior works, everybody's like, well, duh, you shouldn't have took 2 years off if you didn't want to have your sales tank in comparison.
Yeah.
But then you also have somebody like a Playboy Cardi, who a huge percentage of his mystique is based around him dropping very infrequently. And it's just, you know, it's harder and harder for artists to figure out where they fit in and what the right way to go about building a career is.
Yeah, and then you know, going back to the mixtapes, I think that's why, like you had mentioned with Cardi B, or I saw this with Meek Mill a lot. He was very scared of his first week numbers, and that's why he would always be like, "I want to make this 4-song EP instead," or "I want to do this." He was scared to death of being. I mean, this was time he was beefing with Drake, and obviously Drake is doing insane numbers. So the idea of Meek coming out and being able to compete with that was so far fetched. But he also didn't want to not release music. So I think that's a luxury that mixtapes gave you, was I'm going to put out an album. There's not going to be any sales behind it. Academics isn't going to be tweeting what the first week sales are. Nobody's going to give a shit. You know, it's going to, if it trends for 2-3 hours, the internet's talking about it, that's a victory. People aren't going to wait till next week to be like, well, but what did it sell? That's not important. You know, and I think that's why music has gotten boring, is because artists now are so focused on, it's almost like before the mixtape era where it's like, I gotta have a club record, you know, we gotta have at least one hit record, even if it's not the way we make music. It's almost like they're trying to appeal to the label and kind of what the industry wants and the norms, versus making it fun and exciting and being outside the box and doing their own thing. It's very, very, very just, you know, everything has to be proper, because they're so focused on those first week sales.
Yeah, and it's crazy for me because there's artists who you know, I know sometimes when artists buy views on their interviews because I see it on the back end, and I'm like, oh, okay, he's faking his views on this interview, so therefore he probably faked his views on a lot of other interviews and probably his music as well. But then when I think about it, you know, if somebody like Offset were to just randomly drop a project and the first week sales are like 15K or whatever, I mean, Offset's a guy who makes a lot of money from performing at festivals and doing features for artists, and he wants to be booked high up on those festivals and everything like that. And as soon as his you know, numbers don't seem like they're doing too well, a lot of that stuff probably goes away, or it opens the door for people to be like, well, maybe we're not going to pay you $100,000, maybe we're going to pay you $20,000, maybe we're going to pay you way less. You know, it's like a lot of these artists, the most profitable part of their career isn't putting out music, so they have to kind of like inflate the music in order to be able to keep the other things going on.
No, I think it ruins the perception of the artist. Like I know when it was, I think it was Polo G that just came out with small, like, you know, low sales.
He had pretty bad sales after not dropping for like 3 years.
And like for me, you know, I'm a Polo G fan. I think he makes, you know, good music. I think some of his first 2 albums were, you know, great. But for me, even the perception, I'm like, oh damn, he fell off. Like, and I, you know, I'm guilty for that, because I shouldn't feel that way. I should know better, that you can't judge someone by their numbers. Like, he still probably is making good music, but yeah, I think everything now being so numbers focused, you know, it's taken away from the joy and you know, the excitement. Just like when I, you know, signed with this new company, them being solely focused on the numbers and not the impact that these brands had on the world and stuff like that. Like, you know, focusing solely on the numbers, I think is a death wish for, you know, it's just brings about these short-lived careers, this kind of short-term thinking. And yeah, I mean, I do hope, even though DatPiff may never be back the way it was or in that form, I do hope we get back to a way that there can be a middle ground between something just being called an album. And I know people sometimes put out an album, they call it, oh, this is my mixtape. You're like, no, this is an album that's on Apple Music, it's on Spotify, it's on the streaming services. You can call it a mixtape all you want, but we all know it's not a
mixtape in the sense that they were mixtapes back during the blog era. And even the blog era, those weren't really mixtapes in the way that the prior era of mixtapes were, when I was, you know, 13, I was making mixtapes to give to girls in school, like a physical tape, and then that became a CD. But it's like our idea of a mixtape is really kind of meaningless now at this point.
So I do hope, you know, like I said, like they did with SoundCloud, like, you know, some of these other platforms, like some sort of middle ground that can allow these artists to have that freedom once again, that everything doesn't have to be a damn album that's judged by numbers. Because I think it's ruining the way artists make music. It's ruining the way they collaborate. It's ruining their ability to want to do things that are different because they're afraid of, I credit someone like Andre 3000 who comes from the old school, he's obviously super old school, but he was like, I'm going to put out a damn flute album. I don't care what it sells. I don't care about the numbers, there's very few people that are like him that aren't, they don't fear the numbers. They don't fear the perception it's going to, have with them. They just want to do what they do that feels right musically for them. And I feel like that's what a lot of these artists have lost, is that feeling, because they're so scared of being judged for doing anything different, or, they just want to carbon copy what was successful before and not trying to innovate or do anything, new.
And the whole machine that exists to tell rappers that they're irrelevant is so pervasive at this point. Like, I was kind of taken aback when I saw this clip go viral or not viral, but it was at least posted on a few accounts of Corday doing an interview on the Breakfast Club, and Charlamagne the God says to him, I saw a video online that was basically talking about how you sold 10,000 first week and how your career's over and you fell off. I had already watched that video. I'm not subscribed to the channel that posted it, but the YouTube algorithm could tell that this was a popular video. It shoved it right in my face. Corday really got fucked because he put out his album the same day that Kendrick dropped a surprise album, which obviously, if you've paid attention to Corday's career, he's kind of trying to go in the direction of a J. Cole or a Kendrick, where he likes to take a lot of time and put out what he feels like are great bodies of work, etc. And so here we have like one of the biggest hip hop media personalities in Charlamagne, and he's bringing that right to this artist's face.
Yeah.
And I'm even noticing some of the things Corday said to Charlamagne had been almost like edited in his mind. Like, he previously had said, I dropped this album and it did bad first week sales, but then I sold out this whole tour. In that video, the guy breaks down why that's kind of not really so accurate. And actually, he was on tour with a bunch of bigger artists and his tour did okay. And so when Corday is explaining it, he says, I dropped an album, my tour from after that, my tour did real good. So he's already like modified his speech about where his career is at because of that video.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just like such a bizarre new state of affairs where people are just chomping at the bit to hear how somebody fell off. And even there's an artist that I don't get along with. He put out an album. I already knew before I looked into it that it sold like shit. And we ended up doing the numbers, figured out that he sold, 500 copies first week or whatever. And we made a whole post about it because we were trying to get at him. And I mean, even that right there, it's just like, the fact that somebody could be extremely talked about on podcasts and in the media and have all these different Instagram pages covering them all the time and still only stream the equivalent of 500 copies in its first week, I mean, kind of says a lot about where we're at, is that a lot of the fans are more interested in watching a YouTube think piece or watching somebody on a podcast, and those same fans are not really dying to go listen to 20 songs that you made.
No, they want the IRL content now. Like, they don't care. The music doesn't matter. And that's why it's funny, because I guarantee if somebody, and again, I don't like to bring up Neon. He's probably my least favorite streamer, but just for an example, he could put out a song tomorrow. It could be absolute dog shit. Let's say he put out an album tomorrow. Absolute dog shit, horrible. He'd probably sell 5,000, 10,000 first week just off of never having done music, but because of his, so it's all about, nobody cares about the music. Somebody like Corday is one of those artists that should be selling 50,000 first week for sure. He's that talented. J. Cole, should be doing 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, first week. But it's all about now just, it's not really about the music. It's either you make crazy, parody music and it goes, or it goes viral on TikTok and it goes, or you're an actual IRL streamer that has 18 million followers, and that's the reason it streams well. Real music, I feel like, doesn't stream well anymore.
Yeah, like, to build the kind of career that Corday is trying to build is just so unbelievably difficult. And when you look at Kendrick or J. Cole and you think about the era in which they came up and how they were able to actually carve out this big fan base, it's just so unbelievably hard to like quantify exactly what got them there. And with Corday, it's just kind of, I respect that he's staying true to himself and trying to make this kind of career for himself that isn't really based on any shortcuts. But you also just wonder, is it even possible at this point? We don't see a lot of it. It's very hard to picture anybody from the sort of current era who's really able to build something huge for themselves off of being a purist, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, no, that kind of music is sadly, with a few exceptions, like we were talking about Kendrick, J. Cole, you're kind of those guys are grandfathered in, but it's very, very hard for any new artist to really make a way in that lane. And I
Mm.
think Corday, unfortunately, he also has that stigma of, well, you came from YBN and all those other guys who didn't make it. I think they sometimes anchor him down. It's like, those guys were kind of whack. They weren't that good, so you're okay just because your name is just Corday now.
I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like, was the YBN thing a gift or a curse? Because on one hand, yeah, it always kind of puts Corday in this box where they love to laugh at Namir and they love to treat Jay like he's a joke or whatever. But then I feel like people have a similar impulse towards Corday's career, but also would we even be talking about him? What would his career getting off the ground have even looked like if it wasn't for YBN?
Yeah.
It feels like so many artists kind of need to have this like street, and I am doing the quotation mark with my hands right now, the street cosign of like being in like a cool young rap crew or whatever for people to even begin to pay attention to him. Because maybe Corday is only really like interesting to people in the sense that he came out with this sort of street, again, finger quotes, crew, and then transfers into being more of a conscious artist. I feel like that's interesting to people.
Yeah.
Or at least it was very interesting early on. It feels like it might be less interesting now.
I think you're right. I think it's almost that scenario where it's like you got the, one beautiful chick with two fat chicks, or one mediocre looking chick with the two fat chicks. So, she looks like a dime now just because she's with the, it may be something like that where their failure has, and I don't mean fail, but you know what I mean? Like they haven't had nearly the success. They're on kind of being more clowned at this point in their lives, especially Namir. But yeah, maybe he wouldn't be here, because it's so hard to make it as it is, especially as a lyrical, substance-based rapper. It's so hard. Nobody, sadly, wants to hear that anymore. And obviously, I come from the era where that was the biggest thing. You listen for in music. It was just the substance, the punchlines, the witty bars. Coming from Philly, guys like Cassidy was when I was younger. Like listen to his crazy shit he would come up with, or the Lost Boys with songs like Renee and the substance in the songs, and Nas even, and it's just now it's people just want the viral sound, just the and it's cool. Don't be wrong. Some of these songs are catchy, but they have no replay value outside of a couple days or so. Whereas like I'm still listening to Big Pun albums from 1996 or so. I'm not going to be listening to, some of these TikTok viral songs in 10, 15 years. I don't think anybody really is. So I feel like we've really ruined the replay value of good music because we're creating almost one-hit wonders where it's like, yeah, it's cool right now, but we're never going to revisit this hit, or I think it's going to be interesting to see what songs stick that have come out in the last 10 years. What songs 30 years from now are going to be replayed? Could you imagine listening to Gucci Gang? And there's no knock on Lil Pump, but you think you're going to be listening to that in 30 years or 20 years? I mean, like, damn, this song was, maybe for you, because there's nostalgia behind it.
But even Gucci Gang is like best case scenario for a song like that.
Yeah.
It's like, will there be another Gucci Gang? Is there another young, ignorant, crazy kid who's going to be able to write a sort of incredibly simple but catchy song that is going to light the world on fire? Because like, as much as people hated SoundCloud rap, at least there was a lot of excitement about rap at that time. And a lot of those rap fans who were listening to Pump or X or Juice WRLD or whoever, who kind of like lost that, the artist that they were listening to, presumably they kind of transferred to being fans of other rappers at some point. But at this point, it's like, at this point, it almost feels like the rap game would be lucky to have another Lil Pump. Like they would probably be treating him more like a savior if he came out now, because they just need something.
Yeah. No, I agree. And just one quick last story is, you're talking about SoundCloud rappers. You remember Spooky Black?
Oh yeah, Corbin. Yeah,
Corbin.
Yeah.
He goes by Corbin now. So I had this phase. I've always been into kind of dark, alternative music, right? Like, I mean, one of my favorite bands of all time is like Portishead, who, The Weeknd samples all the time. Like I've always liked really alternative and different things. So Spooky Black first came out, and obviously DatPiff is still big and relevant at the time. Reached out to him, wanted to work. Have you ever met him?
No.
Okay. So reached out to him, wanted to work. Kept following up with people around him, like Bobby Raps, who's close to him, is super awesome dude. Yeah. He's a really, really good dude. DJ Tip, who was, their DJ. and got in touch with Spooky Black Corbin at the time. Told him, look, I really want to support you. I think you're dope. I'll give you all the resources. I have the platform, socials, pay you for a release, whatever. I remember he messaged back and he said, "Fuck you, I hate you." Like that was the whole message. You dot, I hate you. And I remember hitting up DJ Tip, like, what's up with him? What's up with this guy? Like he hates, he's anti-culture.
Hmm.
He doesn't want anything that he thinks is associated with pop culture. And I don't know if you remember, there was a story too where Kylie Jenner was singing one of his lyrics on her TikTok one time. Did you remember that?
Kind of, yeah.
And he corrected her and he said, I can see it in the sky. She said, like, I can see it in your eye. And he responded, I see it in the sky, you dumb bitch. Like he responded to her on Twitter like that or so.
See,
but
he was too hardcore before his time, because then you fast forward a few years and Kylie Jenner was playing X's song Sad on her Snapchat story.
Mhm.
And me and everybody who was around X were just like blown away, thought it was the coolest shit ever.
Mhm.
You know, so it's like a lot of times people would be like a little too hardcore for the time period that they're in, because that ended up being a gigantic look for him. But yeah, like even with the Spooky Black thing, and probably a lot of people are watching this think we're talking about a black guy.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about a white dude
Look it up.
who was
Look
called
it up.
Spooky Black at a certain point, and he probably has a strict policy of like, if he does an interview, he's not letting anybody ask him about that name, because I think he ended up feeling pretty horrible about using such a funny name. It's such an inherently viral name too. Like
wearing the do-rag in the first video.
If he had kept that name, he probably would be so much bigger, but he didn't want the attention that was getting him. I don't know, but like how like what was going on in his brain that he thought that was a good idea at that time, besides having no concept of like American racial politics?
Yeah, I don't know. I think he just didn't give a fuck about anything at the time, which was part of the appeal behind him. I also think it's one of the reasons he never advanced further than SoundCloud.
I feel like he's still pretty big though. Like I seen him perform at a festival a couple of years ago.
He was touring with Kid Laroi.
Okay, really? Yeah.
So Kid Laroi was somebody who was like a product of Corbin. I'll call him by his proper name. Was a product of Corbin. You know, somebody who was really into him. But no, that was the one time in my career where I extended an olive branch to someone, being like, I will do it. I'm a huge fan. I really like and support your music. I'll do anything. And basically, I just got a straight up like, fuck you, But then I saw he did it to Kylie Jenner too, and I was like, all right, this dude just doesn't care. From what I heard from Bobby Raps, he actually moved back to Minnesota and he bought like a $79,000 house.
Really?
I'm talking about a shack, and he's just so happy just back in Minnesota living in a shack.
Good for him, because I used to see him around LA drinking lean with all kinds of people all the time. And yeah, I was wondering why I hadn't seen him in a long time. But for the record, Corbin, 250,000 Spotify monthly listeners. Doesn't seem like he's dropped a project in like 3 years.
Yeah.
And then also on his YouTube, he dropped like one music video in the last 3 years. So yeah, maybe not doing terribly well. I don't know.
No, I know it's a random mention, but that's like a core memory. I mean, I've worked with almost all the artists you can imagine, up into maybe the SoundCloud era or so, with some of these newer artists. But he's the one that like just stands out to me. Like, what an interesting guy.
Definitely.
Like I said, I'm a fan of, I think he made great music. I think his voice was so soulful and, but just a very interesting character. So Corbin, if you see this, please make more music and just please be nice to people.
Yeah. Tap inwardly. He probably hates us both, but
he probably. This interview, fuck you both.
Yeah, man. Thank you for your time. I think it was a really important story to get out there. And for anybody who's thinking about starting a business in hip hop based on content or whatever, definitely give them a shitload of context about what the last 10, 20 years of content on the internet has been like. And yeah, hopefully we're not stuck in just this extremely dull period of hip hop forever. Hopefully something exciting happens, but it's definitely going to take a bit of wisdom in order for the next crop of talented rappers to not just like completely burn themselves out, which feels like that's kind of what happens very often these days.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you for having me. I think I hope it was informative. About we really got to make music exciting again. I feel like not just for our sake as the consumer, but for the future of artists. Just getting people out of wanting to become a streamer and wanting to become a musician again. I think the weight has shifted to where people see more value in that than actually having an artistic talent. And I think we're not thinking about the future and what that's going to mean for us as music lovers. So hoping to make that, find some path in that way. So I appreciate the opportunity to explain the history and kind of the thoughts on the future and what we need.
For sure.
Yeah.
KP, I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your time. Yes. Everybody, check my man out on socials. We'll put them on the screen right here and in the description. No Jumper, coolest podcast. Like, comment, subscribe. We out.